Shalom Aleichem. Hayom Yom Sheni. Today is still Monday night. Chamish Asa Yom. L'Chodesh HaShlishi L'Chodesh HaChodesh. The Chassidus HaChodesh, the Chodesh HaGeula. Hey Tov Shin Pei Hey. And I'm beginning now my fourth shir on the Maimer Basi Lagani Tov Shin Chaf Hey, which we're learning this year, based on the fact that this year in Basi Lagani we're learning Perek Tezvav. The shir is a schus for HaKodesh Tzvi ben Alexander HaKoyin Hashem Yimkim Dami. It's a schus for Moshe Yehuda ben Tzvi Yosef Alav Hashem Zechin Bracha Rabbi Moshe Kedlarsky, who was mevasa many besudas tevis to the Rebbe, like he wrote on his tzion, and I'm certain he's continuing to be mevasa besudas tevis. The shir is also schus for Shlema for Meir Chaim ben Chayatzira, Liba Branya bas Alta Miriam, Shlemi Yosef ben Risha, Bracha Hadassah bas Gutka, and Chaim Mushka bas Natal. It shouldn't be V'halei Arucha, it should be Refuah, Shlema Kikeil, Melech, Reife, Neman, Varacham, Anota. B'teva Nirav Anigul Mata, Me'asora Tfachim, Be'elam Azeh Amaisa, Amen. So, we're starting the fourth shir. We're holding Kuf Mem Gimel. This Maimed is 11 pages. 11 pages. 11 pages you could do in 3 shiurim, right? If you do it in 3 shiurim, it's less than 4 amudim per shir. But I'm doing it in 4, which means I got time. Or the shiurim are a little shorter, and they're a little bit easier to sort of halt cup, to keep your head, because they're not going on for 2 hours, as some of my classes do. This is Perek Tezvav Basi Lagani, and as I've explained to you throughout our learning, that the Rebbe is trying to explain, the Frierdiker Rebbe is trying to explain, Bizbuz Ha'oitzres, right? There's a job that has to be done, and the job is done by the Tzivos Hashem, and to help the Tzivos Hashem do the job, the Melech does 3 things. Mevazbeis kol ha'etzes, machnes es asma b'tachsisei milchama, a person gets involved in the war. Mevazbeis kol ha'etzes, she'osru avesa, he dispenses recklessly with treasure of his own and of his ancestors as long as he wins the war. And then finally, mashlachayev mineged, throws away his own life. The Rebbe Rayatz is makatzed in the first point, Machnes atzme b'tachsisei milchama. He's makatzed in the third point, mashlachayev mineged. But there's a gavaldik arichas about the point of bizbuz ha'etzres. And Perek Yud Beis of the Hemshach begins with the words Olahavin ha'inyan eitzel l'mayla, to explain supernal treasure, and he explains it b'hagdama of the Tikkun Ezeir, ein seif lamata l'mayla mayla adein keit or lamata mata adein tachlis. And for 3 prakim he explained lamata mata adein tachlis, Perek Yud Beis at Gimel and Yudalid. And this year Tezvav, and l'chayda next year Tezayin, he's going to explain l'mayla mayla adein keit. And I told you in each one of the last classes that Lanias Daiti, in this Perek Tezvav and in this Maimer, Klalus Ewinyan Atzimtzu, that this Perek is speaking only about the in Seif Lamayla Mayla Adein Kates, Lamayla Adein Kates is Klalus Ewinyan Atzimtzu. In other words, the reason godliness is above the world is because he hides it in order to create the world. In the next Perek, the Rebbe is going to add something much, much deeper. That in Seif Lamayla Adein Kates is not only about the hiding of godliness for the sake of creation. It has to do with a level of godliness which is inherently hidden. An atmis de kamadrega velakus. But if I'm not mistaken, that's next year. In this year's Perek, Lamai Lamaden Kate says Kalusa Yewinyan at Tzimtzum. Now in the last 2 classes, we learned about Tzimtzum. And we also learned about Kavanas at Tzimtzum B'Shvil Gilui. The point of the Tzimtzum is Gilui, and the Tzimtzum is Shalei Kipshute, etc. In other words, the Rebbe is studying the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer. And Kedakya B'Kodesh, in that first cycle, the first 20 years, the Rebbe would study the previous Perek in order, point by point in the Perek. And that's what the Rebbe does in this Maimer as well. He goes through the previous Rebbe's Perek, which is about an amud and a quarter, or a little bit less even, in sequence, in order. And he explained the idea of Tzimtzum, but he also spent a lot of time explaining that the point of Tzimtzum is Giloy, or that the Pnimius of Tzimtzum is Giloy, Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshute, and so on. Towards the end of the Perek, the Rebbe goes back to talk about the Metzias wie es ist. Wie nicht wie Elokus ist behalt. Meaning, there is the truth that Kavanas HaTzimtzum B'Shvil HaGil, the point of the Tzimtzum is Gili, which makes the Tzimtzum the beginning of Gili. There is the truth that Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshuta, even now the Tzimtzum is only L'Gabeinu, only to us, not to him, etc., etc., etc. Says the Rebbe Omnam. All of those higher ideas and those potential ideas and ideal ideas are true. Afapi shel acharei kol ha'inyanim de p'ulas hatzimtzum. Although, notwithstanding the number of effects that the Tzimtzum has, number one, the Tzimtzum itself. Number two, the Tzimtzum affects Kav. Number three, the Tzimtzum, the way it affects Eidin Seif of Kalam. And number four, the way Tzimtzum has a relationship with Atzmos that Hamoiru Be'ez Galus. Says the Rebbe, all of those changes are not really changes, like he brought from the Mittel Rebbe on page Kuf Mem. That Lani Avaya Leisha Nisi. That everything is the same as before. Tzimtzum Shlei Kipshut, Kavanas HaTzimtzum B'Shvil HaGili, and so on and so forth. Says the Rebbe, the reality, however, is that it's Be'ef and the Helam Achat Helam, that it may be true that Bepnimius, the Tzimtzum is not a real Tzimtzum. It may be true that the Tzimtzum is for the sake of Gili. Chatamid of Yukameyu, Shantiyes of Yukameise. Shayin Tiyes of Kameise. But, Bepayo, right now, there's Helam Vehested. And that's the simple idea of Ein Seif Lamai Lama Aden Kates, Hashem is hidden. Harei the Be'ef and the Helam Achat, what's the Lashon? Helam Achat Helam, Ilui Achat Ilui. Heder Ha'er, Heder Agili, all those Lashonis are factually so. The Baal Shem Tov explained. The Baal Shem Tov didn't talk about Kavanas HaGili. The Baal Shem Tov simply talked about Tzimtzum. He just said that hidden in the Tzimtzum is Shamayim. He spoke about Tzimtzum. And the Magid began to talk about Kavanas HaTzimtzum B'Shvil HaGili. But the Baal Shem Tov spoke about Tzimtzum itself. In the manifesting B'chov is ACS Min Aleph Atov, that the Shamayim, the Ruchnius, as the Baal Shem Tov called it, is wrapped in a garment on top of a garment from Aleph till Tov, which is 400 garments, as he explained it. Lower than all those garments are the garments of Klippa. So even though Bepnimius Anyanim, Kavanas HaTzimtzum is B'Shvil HaGili, even though Bepnimius Anyanim, the Tzimtzum Shalei Kipshutei, but the fact, the way we perceive it is Cheshach. The fact, the way we perceive it is Helam. Says the Heilige Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe says in his Maimer, nevertheless, godliness isn't felt. And the fact that godliness is not felt is a product of the idea of Ein Seif L'Mayla Dein Kates. Now there's a number of different steps here, right? There's Hamoiru Be'ez Galus, but the Metzias of Moir is Helam Ha'atzmi, it's a Helam B'Yetzim. The nature of it says Galus is the Inyan Helmi. There's Etzem of Ein Seif, which is Hamshacha V'Lei Gili, which is Lei Naga B'Yatzimtzim. There's the Gili of Ein Seif L'Atzma B'Shvil Atzmi, which is the market of Seif of Kalamet. Where you say Naga B'Yatzimtzim, the Tzimtzum touches it and makes it even Helam. And then you have the Gil L'Atzma B'Shvil Ha'ilmet, which is the market of Kav, where you say Tzimtzum Mamish, that the Tzimtzum changes it. But because the Tzimtzum changes it, that Madrega Veil is actually revealed after the Tzimtzum. So he speaks to this fourth idea, V'gam, B'chinas Ha'er Pnimi, the level of light which is Pnimi, which is revealed in Elamis. Because it's not changed by the Tzimtzum, not touched by the Tzimtzum. It actually goes through the Tzimtzum. It comes B'shina Amos L'Fiyarach Elamis as a Kav, with a Ma'ila Mata, and a Ketim V'ichad, and the Pnimis and the Chitzenius. But it's also Begili. Shehu ha'er v'achayes, ha'machayes kol ha'mtzayim, is the light and life which gives life to all the creations in a way that they feel it. So it may be true that the Atzmas HaMoir is behelam achar helam, be'ilay achar ilay, heder in, heder ha'metzias lagabi elamis, even the HaMoir be'ez galus. It may be true that the Atzmas HaVeir ain't safe, even though it's not at all lay lagabi tzimtzum, but lagabi us is hidden. It may be true lagabi sevav kalam, lagabi us it's helam. But Kav, Mamala Kalam, the Gavias is Gili. Says the Rebbe, but it could be a Gili, what's called the Chsidus of Metzias and not Mahus. You know there's life, but you don't know what life is. Says, and this is a need the Frierdiker Asach. And that's why the Frierdiker repeats it often. Says the Rebbe, Arayash Bruim Ke'elu, there's such creations. She'ena Margishim Shuchayes Eliki. They know they're alive. And they know that life is spiritual. They know life is the real point of everything, but they don't know that it's godly. So even the one madreg of all the madregas of Elokus, that the effect of Tzimtzum on it is not Helam and Heder, but Gili in a way of Tzimtzum, they don't know that they're godly. Everybody feels alive. Hamachai is which gives him life. Moreover, one knows with certitude. The most important thing about himself is his life. The body is not a thing unto itself at all, because Ikir is the Chayes. Says the Frierdiker Rebbe, they don't feel that their life is divine. So the Rebbe says that's the pshat that the Tzimtzum in Seifla Maila Dein Kate is beheder ha'ed and heder ha'gilui. Helam achar helam, ili achar ilu. Even the Madrega of Elkus, which is Bezgals, and Elam is also behelam, because you don't know that it's godly. And like I told you earlier, this is an idea which the Frierdiker Rebbe talks about a lot in his Maimonim. That if you know you're alive and you don't know your life comes from the Eibush, that's also a klip. Moreover, not only is it possible that we should life from the Eibush, and we feel alive and we value life, but we don't know that it comes from the Eibush. But the Fiat, the Rebbe adds further in this pedic, says, the light becomes hidden and blocked from step to step. You say you created the river created you, then you can have a desire. What I have is my own, not from the Eibush, which is mamish even true Pedut. So first of all, you can feel that you're alive and know that it comes from outside of you, but not acknowledge that it comes from the Eibush. And second of all, you can actually say, as the expression that the Rebbe would often use in the Fabrengen, Stam Saposhnik, I made it myself. And that's really the point of this Pedic. The point of this Pedic is not to talk about the idea that the Tzimtzum is like a Pshutim. The point of this Pedic is not to talk about the Kavanas Tzimtzum B'Shvila Gilu, the Tzimtzum is not a real Tzimtzum. The point of this Pedic is talk about the Tzimtzum, B'Klalos, where you're not Tzimtzum. Helam achar helam, ili achar ili, heder head, heder agil, that when the Eibush created the world, he took it in safe away. So there should be makam l'midas eilabis, and the it ain't safe vis-a-vis the world is behelam achar helam, be'ili achar ili. And even the Madreg of Ed, which we do know, we only know that it is, we don't know what it is. And the Rebbe explains the idea. Va'inyan bazeh. The pshat is as follows, and he brings a teide from the Marash. Like I said to you before, the Rebbe is careful, in this Maimed at least, to go in the order of the Rebbeim. First the Baal Shem Tov, then the Maggid, then the Alter Rebbe, then the Middle Rebbe, then Tzemach Tzedek, now the Rebbe Marash. And I have to say that the example that he brings here is atypical, it's unusual, because it's not a Yesh Me'ayin example, it's a Yesh Me'esh example. The example that he brings is that the world is made up of Harkava, of different elements, Eish, Ruach, Mayim, and Ofer. And the Keach HaMarkiv is the Neshama. And if you take away the Keach HaMarkiv, which is the Neshama, it doesn't become Ayin. It becomes Efsheri HaYesh. In other words, there's a Madregya of life, which is not responsible for Yeshas, Yesh Be'ayin, it's simply responsible for Harkava, from Katnas to Gadlus, from Pshitas to Tziyad, to Harkava. And he chooses Davka to give this mashal. He doesn't give a mashal that we see the Yesh, we don't know the Ayin. He gives a mashal, we see the Chaymer and don't really know the Tzura. It's a Yesh and Yesh mashal. There's Dalad Yesedis. Each one by themselves is a Matthias Gashmias. There's the Keach HaMarkiv Dalad Yesedis, which makes a complex Murkav, which we're able to see and hear and smell and taste and touch with our senses because it's sufficiently Gashmiasdik. If you take apart the Dalad Yesedis, and you return them to the elemental stage, they're still physical. In other words, it's not like they become ayin, but they lose the metzias, which we know them when they're grouped together into a unit. And they're also the ikir is the chayes alaki. So the Rebbe Marash's mashal, to explain that we should be able to know the alakus from the world, but we don't, is not we should be able to know the ayin from the yeshus of the world. We should be able to know the tzura of the chaymer, the yeshus of the yeshus in the world, the ruchnis and the gashmias. And he's choosing dafka this mashal. And l'chayra, the reason he's choosing dafka this mashal, because we're talking about only mamalik kalam. And beklolos, and bepashtas, mamalik kalam is not yesh miyayin. Seviv kalam is yesh miyayin, mamalik kalam is yesh miyash. Vadayin tzarachin godel. But this is for sure, that the mashal that he's bringing is not that if you take away the chayes, it becomes ayin, you take away the chayes, it becomes a heder ha-mitzias of yeshus, but it's still a mitzias of yesh. Arguably, if a person would think about life, a person would certainly come to the recognition of it's the words of Hashem and the air of his mouth which creates the goof, the and the neshama, Baruch Piv Kol Tzva of each creation, they would see the godless in the creation. Which is this piece of Maim Rabbim is a Maim which is repeated multiple times. Maim Rabbim is a Hemshech, which is a big Arichas. And in the Maim Rabbim you have the Micha Moicha, which I think the Rebbe Marash was the Rebbe for all of 18 years, said 11 times or 12 times. Rabbi Yenis Nereinitz, Hagon, Harav Yenis Nereinitz, in the Tafresh Chavtes Sefer, which he edited, so in the Mafteach Maimorim, he writes all the places. The Rebbe Marash did the Micha Moicha once every year and a half. This idea of a Tayr Ha'avir, which the Rebbe brings in the Sichos, it's not Yem Yem, and it's in the back of the Vedaita Moskva, which was also one of the Maimorim which the Rebbe Rashab said, the Tayr Ha'avir. So the Rebbe Marash Maimer was Micha Moicha. And in the Hemshech Maim Rabbim, you have the piece of the Micha Moicha. And he explains, Chaymer and Surah, not Ayin and Yesh, but Yesh and Yesh. Chaymer and Surah. Shekol Dover Gash may be a physical thing. Morke Vidal Gesedus Eishroch Maim Va'ofar is comprised of all four elements, fire, wind, water, and earth. And there's a neshama that brings the four together. In other words, the way our senses are conditioned, we can see and hear and smell and taste and touch only such things that are a composite of all four elements. One element by itself, or even three elements by itself, we're not able to see, or hear, or smell, or taste, or touch. They're physical materials, but they're too refined, they're too sensitive for us to be able to appreciate. So our ability to perceive Gashmias is limited, that we can only perceive Gashmias, which is a Murkav. The Galgalim are Gashmi from Chemer HaShameimi. The Tzuras are Gashmi because they're a chibur of the Chemer HaArt with one of the Dalet Tzuras. And what we know is only Batei Sheichne, Batei Chemer, that consists of all four elements together. Says the Rebbe Kol, Dova Gashmi Murkav, every physical thing is comprised, Midal, they say it's small four elements, Eish, Ruach, Maim, of fire, wind, water, and earth. And because all four are together, we can touch them, we can sense it. If the four elements redivide into four elemental stages, nothing is going to remain for us to perceive, not because it's not there, but because we're not sensitive to it. And ma'uma doesn't mean ayin, because we're not talking about ayin and yesh. Ma'uma means a smaller yesh. And it turns out from this mashal, the primary form of all physical things is the life inside of them, the power that grafts and ties and unifies, as Kol says all the elements, because the power of unification is above the four elements to come into being as physical creations. And again, we're talking about four physical elements, and a Keach HaMarkib, which is a Ruchni, which is bringing the four physical elements together to a larger physical thing. But in the language of the Rambam, it's a Gashmi and a Gashmi. It's only Yesh Miyesh, it's not Yesh Miyesh. Still, without the Keach HaMarkib, you can see Eish, you can see Ruach, you can see Maim, you can see Ofar. Each element is by itself. That the power to unify the four elements, Eish, Ruach, Maim, Nafa, comes from the creation itself. B'chol Eish v'rega, every second, v'eifin de l'elam adeshem v'achanitza b'shamayim. Now, the Olam of the Shem V'achanitza B'Shamayim is talking about Yesh Miyayin. That's what has to be B'chol Rega V'rega. We're not talking about Yesh Miyayin. We're talking about Yesh Miyesh, which is why he calls it B'oifen Shel Olam Avayit V'achanitza B'Shamayim. And since we're talking about Tzura and Chema, Yesh and Yesh, it doesn't have to be B'chol Rega, but he nevertheless says B'chol Eisu B'chol Rega V'tzarech Bir K'tzas. Ukvisha Meitza, Shammaz Alter Rebbe says, the mole and it's just lying there, Hashem would open up our eyes and allow us to see. And Sachai is Varuchni is the spirit and the life. Shebechol Nivron, each creation, Shafei, B'meit to be the Shaviruch, that comes to Ibish's mouth, Ibish's air. So then, Loi Hoya Gashmer is Hanivre, V'chumri, Umamoshe, Nir Kalin, in we wouldn't see the physical thing at all, we see the Chayes Alaki. But they most understand that there's two Madregas. In Tanya, it's talking about Yesh Me'ayin. And if the Ayin is revealed, the Dvara Vai, which creates the Ayin, is revealed, the Yesh becomes nothing. Our mind is not talking about Yesh, man. It's talking about Yesh and Yesh. Like it says in the Vedaita, in the Hemshech, in the Rabrachia Maimer, the Hemshech, the Maimer Umnam, Peirik Zayin. Peit Tzadik Kekel Tzadik Vav, where the Rebbe is explaining the relationship between Bria and Asiya. That they're not creating Yesh Miyayin, but they're giving it a Tzura. And that's the mashal he's bringing here. So the Rebbe says, according to the cheshbon we just made, everybody who looks at the physical world can see the Chayas Eliki. Even if he can't see the ayin, but at least he can see the tzura. So every human being, Jew and non-Jew, could reach this recognition. His bananus, through contemplating the following. When a person contemplates the fact that they're alive, and they contemplate that life comes from somewhere, and they contemplate that life comes from the Eibishter, they're automatically drawn to the Eibishter, even if they're not appreciating the Yesh Me'ayin, they're appreciating the Yesh Me'yesh. Says the Rebbe, the Metzias HaDvarim is that it may be true, as the Rebbe suggests, that through his bananus, we should come to know the ayin which is Mahava the Yesh, so we can have an appreciation for the Eibishter in our life. A person comes to the opposite conclusion. A person could decide that he's self-sufficient and he can do whatever he wishes. And so on, and the Rebbe said that would be a terrible mistake. The Eibishter gives you the option, but it's a terrible mistake. The real truth is Hashem gives us chayas. And if we would think about it, we would see it. And if we don't, we start to see klipa. And that's a product of tzimtzum, and that's the pshat, ein seif lamay adein ketz, that he hides. A person comes to the opposite conclusion, not only is there blockages of Seder Ishtalshlus, from the Eitzis Aleph to Tov, which also have the klipas of Tehim, and Cheshech, and so on, which is Helam, it's hiddenness and sublimeness, which is beyond any measure, without any limit. So the Rebbe explains the other side of the coin. And the other side of the coin is that the Pnimius is whatever the Pnimius is, but the Chetzenius is the Helam, and the Helam is very important. Now let's start Perek Vav. And the Rebbe continues the Perek Vav, and he makes the point, which is, I guess, most directly connected to the idea of Ein Seif Lamay Adin Kates, which is in this Maimed. Because in this Maimed, in this Perek Vav, as opposed to Perek Zayin, as I explained before, the inyan of the Lamay Adin Kates is the inyan Tzimtzum. It's not speaking about a level of Elikus which is higher than Gilui, Atzmos of Elikus, as we'll see next year. It's simply speaking about the idea of Tzimtzum. And the idea that in order for the Eibishter to create the world, the Elikus has to be hidden away. Helam achar helam, ili achar ilu, beheder agilui, is connected to the Seif Lamayla Adein case in the sense that the Elikus is hiding. But here he explains the significance of the phrase Lamayla Adein case. And this is a lashon from the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimed also, that calls out Bekeach Ein Seif. The idea that there's a Gili Elikus, and the idea that in order for there to be Makal Midas Elam, as that Gili Elikus has to be removed. And all the levels that we outlined before, Atzmus, Gili Ein Seif, the Makar Akav, and so on. So there should be Makal Midas Elam. And although the Pnimius Akavona of the Tzimtzum is Gilui, and therefore the Tzimtzum is not a Gili, Tzimtzum Amiti, but in our experience, in the reality as we know it, as the Rebbe said in Perek Hey, the Tzimtzum is actually hiding the Elikus. Says the Rebbe, this hiding of Elikus is Bekeach Ein Seif. It takes a power of the Eibush, which you call Ein Seif, La says Halom is Vestedem Kel, to create this degree of hidden and blocked. Keach Ein Seif obviously means an infinite power. We usually use it for Heilada. When we talk about reproduction, say Keach Ein Seif. I had it recently in another Maimed that I learned here, from the Shvuas Hemshech Tafshin Tezayin, where he used the idea of Keach Ein Seif to explain the idea that a neshama becomes a mahalach. Here he's using the idea of Keach Ein Seif for the idea of Helam V'Hester. The Kshem Shais Pashtas B'Ha'ed, just like when you talk about Gili Elikus, that there is godliness, and there's godliness which is above the phenomenon of Mokem, and then there's a godliness which is manifest in all of Mokem. That this godliness which radiates in a way that's beligavul and ain't safe to the lowest steps, ain't safe davke. Only ain't safe can have an inyan of oyer that has no constraint and is mei b'chol mokem, and maybe even b'chol mokem b'shavah. Says the Rebbe Shazehu inyan der safe lamata adin tachas, which is idea discussed in the earlier parakim Perek Yivei Gimel Dal but Gili Elikus, that it takes a Keach Ein Seif. And you can maintain the same is also true, that Keach Ein Seif, it takes a power of the Eibush which is absolute without any limit, that is Mailim Umasted, that hides and that blocks, Be'eriba Alam is vested with a series of hiddennesses and a series of blockages. I once learned that Rebbe Yatz has Ha'agos to the Samach Vov. It's very, very long, and it's in the first few pages, mamish. And it's printed in the back of the newer Samach Vovs. Maybe now it's printed in the, I don't know where, maybe it's printed in the new Samach Vovs also. But one of the many, many ideas that the Frierdiker Rebbe touches on is the difference between the word Helam and Hester. Helam means you can't see the light because the light is too far away. Hester means you can't see the light because something foreign is blocking. So Hester is a greater tzimtzum than Helam. And he uses already a few times in this few lines, which is a direct quote from the Maimon Basi Legane Tafshin Yud. Perek Tezvav, both Lashen is Helam ve'Hester. Shezeu Eid Seif, L'mayla Mayla Den Kates. The idea that godliness can be so hidden and so blocked so that there's Mokam Lamidas Elam takes a Keach Ein Seif. Now, of course, this idea is mentioned in Sharich V'Amunah, in Perek Dalet, where the Alter Rebbe uses the expression Hein Hein Gvurei Esav. These are the Eibishter's Gvuras, meaning just like it takes the Gvuras of the Eibishter to reveal Ein Seif HaGodel, it takes the Gvuras of the Eibishter to conceal Ein Seif HaGiber. And the reason this is so emphasized is because you and I are far more mispal from a Gilui B'li Gavul than from Helam. In other words, the idea that light or anything has no limit, it's infinite, is very impressive to us. And it's impressive in the kind of way that we appreciate it and we're moved by it, because we're finite. And we live in a finite world where everything changes and everything ends and everything is replaced. So the notion of Ein Seif in terms of manifest and Gilui is very meaningful to us because we can't relate to it. But concealment, we're saturated. Our whole reality is the reality of concealment. But the Alter Rebbe says you cannot allow your preconceptions based on your perspective offset the objectivity of your philosophical approach. And if you think about it philosophically, just like Gilui is a Keach Ein Seif, Helam is a Keach Ein Seif. Just like Godel is a Keach Ein Seif, Gibber is also a Keach Ein Seif. It's the same Keach Ein Seif. There is infinity in Gilui Elokus and there's infinity in Helam of Elokus. And to explain it in simple words, the whole concept of Yesh Me'ayin is Hashem creating something in the kind of way that you have Helam v'Hester Rabbeinu Me'anivra. You see a creation. It's obvious that this creation has not always been here. Somebody put it here. But there's absolutely no evidence, no indication, no clue as to who that is. The Eibishter is able to create effects with leaving no mark of his presence. Like the Lashon which is brought in the Rambam. When the Rambam talks about proofs for the Eibishter, so he speaks about the Manias HaGalgal, the orbit, which encompasses the entire universe, the ball, which encompasses the entire creation. That the Eibishter Manias HaGalgal, the universe is constantly spinning, and there's no hand and there's no motion, it's just spinning as if it's spinning by itself, although of course nothing spins by itself, somebody has to affect that it spins, and that is the Eibishter. So with Beli Mineya and Beli Yad, the Eibishter is able to affect his creation without in any way showing signs of his presence. As the expression is, if you have enough detectives and enough determination and enough forensics, you can solve any crime. You can figure out anything. You can figure out who did anything. The Eibishter, the whole idea of Yesh Me'ayin is that he does, and he does it in a chronic way, in a perpetual way. B'chol rega v'rega, and yes, there's no symptoms of his presence. That's called a Koyach Ein Seif of Gvura. It's a Koyach Ein Seif concealment, and that's what the Rebbe is speaking to here. That we all appreciate that the godly manifestation that's infinite is coming from the Eibishter, because only he can be infinite. Says the Rebbe appreciates, as the previous Rebbe appreciate, that it's equally true that it takes an infinite power of the Eibishter to hide that the Eibishter is doing. Or to say it in other words, when you see revelation of Hashem, you're seeing an expression of his infinity. And when you see the hiddenness of Hashem, you're seeing another revelation of the Eibishter, just in a different form. It's the form of concealment. And this is why Tzimtzum is called L'mayla Dein Kates. Tzimtzum means to hide his light. That's what it means. Ein Seif L'mayla Dein Kates means that there's something infinite about hiding light. So the Rebbe is explaining here in Perek Vav why. The Eibishter hides his light in order for there to be the world. When the Lashon, which is sort of the mainstay of this Perek Tezvav, Ubeklol is 4 lines into Perek Tezvav of the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer, which of course our Rebbe quotes in the beginning of Perek Beis. 5 lines of Perek Beis, Ubeklol is when you're not Tzimtzum. This Perek is about Tzimtzum. So he tells you here, Tzimtzum is a Keach Ein Seif. And it's called L'mayla Ad Ein Kates, not because of the hiddenness, but because of the infinite power necessary to effect the hiding. Ein Seif L'mayla Ad Ein Kates means that it takes the power of Ein Seif to effect the concealment. It takes infinity for the kus to be involved in the world, and you don't see his presence in the creation whatsoever. Mamshich, and the Rebbe continues, if you look at the print, I am using the Hanoch of Teres Menachem. The first 4 lines are a quotation. Then you literally have 7 words in a parenthesis, and he continues, this is this is still the Frierdiker Rebbe's own words. Behold, it is true, Ata, you are a God mistated of concealment. And the previous Rebbe explains, still the Lashon Hara for the Frierdiker Rebbe's Maimer. The phenomenon of concealment, which includes Helam, as well as Hester, who b'bchinas Ata Mamish, comes from a drega of Ata. And Ata means Atzmos. You know, that I think it's in that Yem, but there's the classic word from the Alter Rebbe, Ata du Atzmos, hus ein Sei Baruch Hu, Harei sot sich bavisen, das was mir sollen dir wissen. In Chassidus, Ata goes on Atzmos. Havaya is the name of the Eibishter, and Ata goes on the Eibishter. Ata is speaking to Hashem directly like a child does. There's more truth in you than Hashem and Elokeinu and Shakai and Elokim and Kelchoi and all the other names of the Eibishter, because that's the Pshitas HaAtzmos. But you can speak to Hashem in first person, Ani or Anechi, second person Ata, or third person Hu. And Ata is the most direct form of communication to the Eibishter. That's not the Eibishter himself speaking, it's second person. And in Chassidus, Ata, Yid is talking to the Eibishter. He says to the Eibishter, Ata, that's Mamish Atzmos. But he wants you to see it in the following way. Ochen Ata Keil, Mistater, it has to be read Ochen Ata Keil, and Ochen Ata Mistater. Which means Ochen Ata Keil, just like the idea of Keil, which is the idea of Gilui, comes from Ata. Similarly, Ochen Ata Mistater, the idea of Mistater also comes from Ata. Ata means Hashem himself, you. Hashem himself, that's above anything other than the fact that he exists. The fact that Hashem exists, in other words, he must be. Havaya means he's a Faranenkite, he's a being. And we call in the Sifrei Machshava, he's a Mechoyev HaMetzias. He has to exist because his existence is only from himself. While everything else is called Efsheri HaMetzias, it could exist because its Metzias is not from themselves, but it's taka from him. So Ata is an allusion to that truth. And from Ata there's 2 inyanim, Keil, which is a Gili of infinity, and Mistater, which is the concealment of infinity. And that's how we have to read it. Look at the Lashon. We all know that there's a concept of the Eibishter's kindness. And the Eibishter's kindness is called Chesed, and it comes from Shem Keil. The Yemu Bechinas Gili, the word Yem means revelation, like it says in the beginning of Bereshis. We can add Yem. Hashem's revelation is kind. Moreover, Hashem's revelation is Shem Keil. And I have a shtikl Chassidus in which I have an extraordinary koch. I have a shtikl Chassidus in Echech Koch Sach Gewaldig. And that shtikl Chassidus is in Basi Legani Toshin Chavav, which is Muge, at the end of Siv Vav. I don't have the page number, but I wrote the Perek down. Where the Rebbe brings from earlier Rebbeim that the Shem Keil is not the first Midah in terms of Chesed of Atzilus. Keil is Chesed. But rather, Shem Keil, like it says in Anila Degdi in Nukutatera, means the first name of Yedil Midas HaRachmim. So Shem Keil is the name of the Eibishter, which is not denoting Chesed as a Midah, which is limited, which is Atzilus, but Shem Keil is a Midah, which is denoting the Ein Seif, the Gili of Ein Seif, of the Yedil Midas HaRachmim, which is above Ishtalshalos. And we say Ata Keil. Ata, from the Pshitas of Elokus, from Hashem, as we call him, you, comes revelation in a way of Ein Seif. And if you learn that Shtik El HaMaimer, he explains that Keil goes on Ein Seif, and it goes on Ein Seif in the kind of way that's Ein Mein Amoir. Ein Mein Amoir means whatever the sources the Ein reveals. In fact, the Ein reveals even the Inyanim and Mar, which can't be in a state of Gilui, but they're in a state of Helam. The Ein is carrying them as well, and that's a touch Ata Keil. So the Rebbe says, the Frierdiker Rebbe says, it's like Ochen Atakel, it's Ochen Atakel Atamistater. These are still the words of the Frierdiker Rebbe. Masha Mistater Mishalim. The blockage and the hidness. I know that he reverses the order. First Hester, then Hel. Hu beginnes Atamamish. Atakel, from Atmos Hus, from the simplicity of Hashem, which we call you, comes revelation in the way of Ein Sof, Hagodol. And Atamistater, from the simplicity of you, comes Hagiber, the Eibish's ability to hide himself. So the Pshat in this Perek Vav, which is quoting the lines from the end of the previous Rebbe's Maimer Perek Tes Vav, which is explaining why Klaus Winyan Tzimtzum, as this Maimer is explaining at length, is talking that the Eibish's ability to hide comes from L'mayla Aden Kates, because it takes the power of Ein Sof to hide. And L'mayla Aden Kates means that the hiding is a power which is so high that it goes higher than any other koyach. So L'mayla Aden Kates in this Perek doesn't mean that godliness is very high. It means that the ability to hide godliness is very high. Ein Sof L'mayla Aden Kates, Ein Sof has the infinite ability to hide in a way that's L'mayla Aden Kates. I think that's pshat in this Maimer. And now the Rebbe explains it, quoting the Rebbe Rashab, which is the last of the Rabbeim that the Rebbe quotes in this Maimer in order, like I pointed out. And the Rebbe Rashab explains at length both in Samshech Samach Vav. And the footnote Zayin, you see the Rebbe is referencing the Maimer Adam Ki Yakriv in Samach Vav, and he says also Vasmucham, the later Maimorim. I don't know exactly what the Rebbe is referring to, and I don't fully understand what the Rebbe is saying. Just like the infinite power of revelation, which is infinite. Nim Shech Mebligvul Amiti comes from the truth of Bligvul, which we call Hagodol, which we called in this Maimer. Lamata Din Tachlis, Kach Gam Keach HaMagbul, V'Gam Keach HaGvul, the power to limit, and the power that is limited, Shalamata Mimenu, which is lower than Beligavul, Nimshach Mebchinas Beligavul Amitidafke, they come from the same meaning from Beligavul. Gvul is lower than Beligavul. Now you have to understand, when you say Gvul is lower than Beligavul, you don't mean what Gvul is by itself and what Beligavul is by itself. You mean Gvul in relationship with us, and Beligavul in relationship with us. Gvul is lower than Beligavul because we're closer to Gvul, because we're Gvul ourselves. But there's two things: the power that limits. If you ever learned the sugya of Kav, you have it in Samach Vav and other places. The Kav has three madregas. The middle madrega of the Kav is that the Kav is not a limit, but it affects a limit in Seder Ishtalshlos. And the lowest madrega of Kav is that the Kav itself is limited. Keach HaMagbul is higher than Keach HaGvul. And Keach HaMagbul is the source of Keach HaGvul. And Ochen Ata, Mistater, Ein Sof L'mayla Aden Tachlis, speaks to the idea that godliness can hide to such an extent. And just like the Gilui, Hagodol, comes from Ein Sof, the concealment, Hagibir, also comes from Ein Sof. You have this in the very beginning of Adam Ki Yakriv in Samach Vav. I looked. I don't see an arichas on the point that the Rebbe is making here in the Samach Vav, first of all, and I don't fully understand the point that the Rebbe is making. Shall I do it is known when godliness is revealed, and you wish that in this godliness there should be a tzimtzum and hakbala, a contraction and a limitation. The revelation itself cannot limit itself, because revelation by definition is without a limit. The only way to limit the revelation is to go back to the source. Godliness emerges from its source. The way it emerges from its source is the way it's going to be. If somehow, when it emerges from its source, it has to be adapted and changed, it has to be limited and symptomed, it has to come not from the godness which is manifest, but from the source itself. Misham dem shchakeach, only if there comes the strength, litzamsim, to contract, or lahagbel, and to limit. Now I must say that I am compelled, I am leaning, I'm very, very driven to say that the pshat here is, I'm very, very disposed to say that the Rebbe doesn't only mean that when a gili comes out, and after the gili comes out, you want to affect the limit in the gili, you have to go back to the source. But rather, the very concept of gilui is a limit. You have the famous Klal Godel, which I saw twice in Chassidus, the sort of Yedaita Moskva Reish and Zayin, and the Hemshech Tzadik Dalef from the Frierdiker Rebbe, where he brings Klal Godel, Zeo Klal Godel, Kol Shu Gili Ha'etzem. Is Hel Magabe Azul, is Hol Gil Magabe Azul, is Hel Ma'atzmi. Anytime you reveal the whole truth, it's hidden from anybody else. And then anytime you reveal to another, it's automatically a contraction over what it is by itself. Revelation means tzimtzum. And revelation means tzimtzum even in Ein Sof. Because Ein Sof and its mahus is so bottled to the source that not only there's no Agbala, there isn't even a spashtos, there isn't even a gili, it's bottled, it's etzem, it's choshech, it's dark. The idea that oyer emerges, and it's in a state of gili, even if the gili is eses menei ubei, is a tzimtzum and Ein Sof. So I think that what the Rebbe is saying here is that it's not only that for a light which comes out of the source to be limited, you have to go back to the source, but the very fact that there is a light which is revealed is already a limitation. And the limitation is not coming from the revelation itself, it's coming from the source. In other words, every gilui involves a tzimtzum, even if it's a gilui of Ein Sof. Alachas kama v'kama is a gilui which is b'medid of Agbala, like Kav. And if you have a gilui which is b'medid of Agbala, the medida, the measure, and the limit in the oid is not coming from the oid itself, it's coming from the source. And then the Rebbe says something more, which I don't fully understand. V'ad Rabba, to be sure. Mitzad, because of this fact, that Ein Sof, which emerges from the source, cannot limit itself. And if there's going to be a limit in Ein Sof, the limit has to come from the source of the Ein Sof, which is the Moed. It's a necessity to say, the notion Hashem can conceal, and the idea of limitation that exists potentially in Atzmos and Musa in Tzav Baruch Hu, Magia touches Ba'ata, in the idea of Hashem as He is by Himself, L'mayla Yesem in the Kel, even higher than the idea of Kel, because it's Inyan Agila, the concept of revelation. He just makes this statement that Hagriva is deeper than Agadol. The idea of limitation is deeper than revelation. Doesn't qualify it, doesn't explain it, states it as a matter of fact. And he states as a matter of fact as if it's a Behech Rechleimer. What's the Behech Rechleimer? Why? Is a Gili of Ein Sof less a revelation of Ata than the ability for Ein Sof to be limited? I don't know the answer. But my guess is, because when Eir comes out of the source, Me'ein HaMoed, it's Taka Memela. That's the whole concept of Ein Sof, like you have in the Maimer of Zeis Chukas and Samach Vav. The whole concept of Ein Sof is it comes from the source, without the source creating it, which is why it's not an infant Shanisi in the Moed. But that's only true if the Eid is exactly Me'ein HaMoed. If there's any Shinui in the Eid, compared to how it is in the Moed, that requires a Keach. So, that's not Memela, right? That's Ba'Pa'ula, which creates the other issue of Shanisi. But I don't know why he just states it as a matter of fact, but he does. The first statement in today's this shtikela is that just like the Keach Ein Sof of Gilui comes from Ata, the Keach Ein Sof of Helam and Agbala and Helam, Hesed and Agbala, Hesed and Helam comes from Ata as well. And the second statement is that to be sure that the Yinif and Hesed and Helam is even deeper than the Gilui. Kel Mistater is deeper than Kel. Ochen Ata Mistater is deeper than Ochen Kel. And why? I'm not sure. Umevi dugmois umishalom. And then the Rebbe Rashab in the Samach Vav and in the Ayin Beis gives examples for this on a number of levels. Number one, kfi shehu lamata min hatzimtzum, as it is after the tzimtzum. In Elam is bekelim the biyad, that's the first level. Ulamai is bekelim datzios, the kelim of tzils, which is the second level. V'gam lifnei hatzimtzum, and in lifnei hatzimtzum, which is the third level. Ad lebechinas atzmos, even kvayachol the relakus is included in atzmos. On each of these four levels, there is a mashal for the interface between Hagadol and Hagibur. And on each level, the Hagibur is a deeper koyach than the Hagadol. The idea of revelation, which reflects the sources, Hagadol happens by itself, and the idea that this revelation can be somehow compromised because of the Keach Ein Sof to limit and to hide, which comes from Hagibur, is deeper than each one of these four levels. And I don't know what he's talking about. I don't remember. I haven't learned Samach Vav in a little while, but I don't remember what he's talking about. I've been frustrated by this shtickle maimer since I started preparing it, and I'm frustrated now. I looked inside yesterday and today. I'm going to move on, and I don't fully understand it. The bottom line is that the Rebbe says that in the Samach Vav, he brings a variety of Mishalim, from Yah, from Atzilas, from Ein Sof, from Lifnei Hatzimtzum, and from Atzmos. And in each case, he shows two things. Number one, that the power to conceal and hide is equal to the power to reveal. And number two, that in fact, the power to conceal and hide is deeper than the power to reveal. And he continues and he says, that the idea that Hagadol and Hagibur exists in every world, until Atzmos and Hus. In other words, Ochen Ata Kel, and Ochen Ata Mistater. both exist till Atzmus and Hus until the Madrega Yecheles. And that we say that the Hagibir also comes from Yecheles. And we say that in a certain aspect the Hagibir is even deeper than the Hagadol. Applies also to the Madrega Yecheles. Now of course, Yecheles is a very funny sugya. As I mentioned to you many times, the Rebbe in Tafshin Chav Beis, which is 3 years before this is Tafshin Chav Hey, where he spoke about Erein Seif, talks about Yecheles, and I gave an extra shir. If you can go back 3 years, look at my recordings if you want to. In Tafshin Pei Beis, when I taught Basel Lagani Tafshin Chav Beis, I gave an extra shir pointing out the chiddush that the Rebbe is saying about Yecheles. And the more you learn it, the more you realize that the Rebbe Rashab speaks about Yecheles, but the Rebbe is explaining Yecheles. And the Rebbe is explaining the chiddush of Yecheles. And one of the most important chiddush about Yecheles is that Yecheles is not Atzmos, it's only Yecheles Atzmos. But because Yecheles is Yecheles Atzmos, there's no different Yecheles, there's one Yecheles, Yachal for everything. There's no separate Yachal for Gilin, separate Yachal for Helim, because in the Ba'ala Yecheles, Yachal is not a Metzias, it's simply the Yecheles of Atzmos and Hus. So this is where opposites meet. Opposites don't only meet in Atzmos, opposites meet in the Madrega of the Yecheles for those opposites. And like the Rebbe explained in Tafshin Chav Beis, that makes two opposites, even Blikvul and Gvul, Yeshus and Bittul, in Yecheles, in Oyer. It brings them together in the Madrega of Yecheles. And arguably he's saying a similar thing over here. Shesham Munyan Yecheles, that in the Madrega, where you have the two opposites of Hagadol and Hagibur, Gili and Helm and Hester. The way they are in Yecheles, it's Yecheles Lahoyer, Yecheles Shalei Lahoyer. It's the possibility for air to emerge, which reflects the whole source with a capital S. And it's the possibility for air to emerge which is not going to reflect the whole source, and not reflect the source at all. And moreover, Kfi Shehem B'Shavar, they're equal. And the Pnimius HaYarim, it's not just that they're equal, it's only one Yecheles. But somehow, even though in the Madrega of Yecheles there's one, the Hagibir is somehow deeper than the Hagadol. Because the Hagibir L'cheda happens, Memela, that aid emerges, and Hagibir is B'derech change in that Memela. But I don't know. And the Rebbe says in Mizanim Shachim, the fact that in every Madrega there's a Hagadol and a Hagibir. And just like the Hagadol is a Keach Ein Seif, so is the Hagibir a Keach Ein Seif until Yecheles HaAtzmos, from the idea that in Atzmos you have Yecholte Elohai and Yecholte Shalei Elohai, which is the Yecholte for Hagadol and the Yecholte for Hagibir. Mizen Nimshach, from that level it comes down based on Yonim. The two ideas as they exist in Erein Seif, as it's a Matthias of Lamata Dein Tachos, Lamayla Dein Kates, Godness is revealed everywhere and Godness is revealed nowhere. That Shnei and Bekeach Ein Seif, they both have an infinite power. Now appreciate what the Rebbe is saying here. He's saying that Yecheles is not Atzmos. But Yecheles is, quote, only Yecheles Atzmos, and therefore Yecheles is one. So when Yecheles, the Yecheles for Lamayla Dein Kates, and the Yecheles Lamata Dein Tachos is the same Yecheles. But Erein Seif is a Matthias of Eir, Hamshach and even Gilu. So the Tikkun Ezer says in the Madrega of Erein Seif, it's two things. Erein Seif Lamayla Dein Kates, Lamata Dein Tachlis. The Gilu, the Hagadol of Erein Seif is called Lamata Dein Tachlis. And the Hagibir and the Helam V'Hester of Erein Seif is called Lamayla Dein Kates. So in Yecheles, it's a singular Yecheles, which includes both the idea of Kale and the idea of Mistater, but in Erein Seif, they're two separate in Yonim, in Erein Seif, but it's two different Tchunis. That since Erein Seif is a Metzias, so because it's a Metzias, it has a definition. And a Metzias can tolerate two different midas that are separate from one another in Higoyen at least. Lamayla Dein Kates, Lamata Dein Tachlis. The idea that Godness extends everywhere is based from the idea that Elkus has been said of Gili. And Lamayla Dein Kates, the idea that the Abish has Godness is removed from the words, and the Keach Shalei L'Hoyer is a Keach Ein Seif to affect the Helam V'Hester. So why do we say that B'Klolos Winyan at Tzimtzum is connected to Ein Seif Lamayla Dein Kates? Because the power for Tzimtzum comes from Lamayla Dein Kates. Tzimtzum is affecting the godless, so we know to say there's Tashlos. Lamayla Dein Kates, when the Abish is removed from the world. The ability for there to be Tzimtzum and say that there's Tashlos is predicated on the idea of Lamayla Dein Kates, which is Hakeach Lahatamsim Lahailim Echad Achad Helam, because it doesn't deposit Ochanat to kill Mistatim. So, basically the Rebbe is saying that all of us understand that Gili is a big deal. We have to equally understand that Helam V'Hester is also a big deal. And more specifically, not only is Helam V'Hester also it's a big deal in some weird way, and I'm not even sure what that way is, it's a bigger deal. And that's the Pshat, Lamayla Dein Kates. That although in this Perek, L'may L'may Adin Kates, it's not talking about a Madrega Elikus, which is in the state of Helam, but rather the Helam Elikus for the sake of Elames. But the power for that Helam V'Hester comes from Atzmos. Only Atzmos can hide. Only Atzmos can make this kind of a Tzimtzum, that the Elikus should not be revealed in the world, which is Achenata Kel Mistata, which is Elikus L'may L'Adin Kates. But he's not finished. We so far spoke that the idea that godness can be hidden from the world. So the godness that is being hidden is one thing, but the koyach that's affecting that hiding is another thing altogether. That's a much higher idea. So the Rebbe says, in addition to being a koyach alaki, which high is godliness, that should be makom with midas ha'elam as yav also klipa. Shemestat, he hides further, become a kisuyin in a variety of different covers, or become a klipa, a different klipa. And this is retributed to the Baal Shem Tov's Teira, which we had in Perek Beis, that after all the levushim of Aleph through Tov, that's in Kedusha itself, there's the levushim of klipa. This all comes down to human experiences. It's the idea of the idea that a person is such a Malgaiva that he thinks he's separate from the Eibishter, or he's his own Eibishter. And that's even a bigger Helam V'Hester than the Helam V'Hester of L'may L'Adin Kates. L'may L'Adin Kates means Hashem hides. L'may L'Adin Kates means that the power for him to hide godliness must come from the Pshitus of Ein Seif, from the Beligul of Ein Seif. And now L'may L'Adin Kates means that you have Klipa, which is different than the idea that Hashem can hide infinitely. Ukafish and Messiah by when the Rebbe Rayatz finishes. She'inyan, that the idea of Hashem hiding godliness from us, both in terms of Kedusha and even in terms of Klipa. Hu B'Keach Ein Seif Dafka requires a power of the Eibush which has no limits. The Rak B'Keach Ein Seif only a power which is absolutely infinite. Just like the power to reveal requires a Keach which is Ein Seif. Similarly, the power to hide is the Keach Ein Seif, L'Hailim, L'Hasde, to hide and to block. A great variety of hiddennesses and blockages. So there should be Metzias HaElemes, and that's the Taichet and Seif L'may L'Adin Kates. So the final verdict in Perek Tezvav of it Seif L'may L'Adin Kates doesn't only mean the hiding. It means the power behind the hiding. Hiding is not an infinite koyach, it's the concealment of a koyach. The power to conceal, that's the infinite koyach, and that's the pshat in Seif L'may L'Adin Kates. And as I said before, the Rebbe seems to be saying that in a certain aspect deeper than Seif L'mata Adein Tachlis, and I'm not sure the reason. So that's what this shir, this is our fourth shir of the Basi Lagan and Tavshach is about. It's about saying that although we explained that the Tzimtzum is V'shir Gili, and the Tzimtzum is like Kipshur to the Pyramid Tzimtzum is Gil, all those other things, the human experience is not that. The human experience of Elikus is hidden. Says the Rebbe, the hiddenness of Elikus is Elikus. The hiddenness of Elikus has the power of Ein Seif to affect such a degree of concealment. Now we go to Perek Zayin and we finish the Maimer. The Rebbe finishes the Maimer, Perek Zayin. V'zehu inyan ha'etzer. The whole Basi Lagani is about a Aveda v'eskafia, v'eshapcha, to win a Melchemes Nitzachim, to bring Mashiach Tzidkenu. And for this end, the Melech is mevazbeis as ha'oitzes, and he gives it to the Pkidi Achal, but for the sake of the Anshe Achal. What is this treasure? It's the Ein Seif L'may L'Adin Kates. It's the infinite keich of the Eibishter that can make tzimtzum. Sheneis, which is given to the soldiers, kedei l'natzeach b'malchama, to win the war. V'hainu sheneis, that you give l'raka se'inyan der Ein Seif L'mata Adin Tachlis, not only the level of godliness which is revealed. That in this Perek it's a nuance. Why L'mata Adin Tachlis, Gili of Ein Seif, Hagodol, is different than, less than Hagiber, which is the Keich Ein Seif Tahad, which is considered deeper, like you said on the previous page in the bracket, which begins with the word V'adarab. And I didn't understand it then, I don't understand it now. In the next Perek L'Cheid, it'll be more explanatory. But in this Perek, that with the Ein Seif L'may L'Adin Kates simply means Kaluse Winyan HaTzimtzum, but it takes a Keich Ein Seif to affect Tzimtzum. Even that is considered higher than the Ein Seif L'mata Adin Tachlis. The Hagibet is deeper than the Hagodol. And the Gam Mevazbizim says you even dispense recklessly of the treasure. And what does treasure mean? All kinds of treasure, what's hidden. Treasure means hidden. And in Elikus it means the koyach to hide Elikus. It's the hiddenness and the loftiness of L'may L'Adin Kates. The idea that godliness is removed to leave place for Elam Eis, and that the koyach of Ein Seif needed to effect that removal is the Eitzer. And it's very, very hard to appreciate in this Perek why that is higher than the Ein Seif L'mata Adin Tachlis. Even though the Rebbe says that Hagibit is deeper than the Agadol, I don't understand it. And in the next Perek, maybe it'll become clearer. But B'chal Leifen, Kashas Ahin, Kashas Ahed. Using the Eitzir, the soldiers win the war. This means to say, the Rebbe explains this in the Frierdiker, Rebbe explains it in the later Prakim, like Yudches and Yutes, that the treasure is given to the generals. It's meant to reach the foot soldier. He needs the treasure to win this war. Anshe Hatzava, the members of the army, they're called the Eibishter's army. There's also winning the war, actually. This is what's happening now. Just like when you left time the first, they're called Tzivas Hashem. Like the Pasuk says, and I learned and I looked in the Maimed of Memhei, I have it here, 20 years later, which I'm hoping to teach next. Basi Lagani Memhei. I taught it already, but I want to reteach it, because I want to revisit the Sugi of Tzimtzum, which the Rebbe explained so deeply. And that Maimed, it's so interesting. It looks like an easier Maimed. It is an easier Maimed in terms of Haskalah. Although the Tzimtzum Sugi drove people insane. It's a shorter Maimed, an easier Maimed. But the foundation of the Maimed is Mesidus Nefesh. You don't have Mesidus Nefesh here. The Rebbe says in Chassidus, the difference between a soldier and a slave, an Evet Poshet and a Chayal, Evet Poshet has Kabbalah Seil. A soldier has Mesidus Nefesh. And that's the issue. Yidmen left Mitzrayim, go Tzivas Hashem, it could not because of their Kabbalah Seil, because their readiness to Mesidus Nefesh. Just like when Yidden left Mitzrayim, do great miracles. So to a Mashiach comes there, and if Lois Hashem is going to show us even greater wonders, will be as Mashiach said, Kainu Adei, Ha'avoid, through the labor and the work. During the duration of Golos, by Yitzir L'Mechama, by going out into this war, during the last days of Golos. By Eivin Shaleichim, it's the Eitzah, we take the treasure, and now he qualifies the Eitzah. That this is the Eitzah Sheyir Shamayim. The Eitzah Sheyir Shamayim belongs to the Eibishter. And he gives it to us, Chachafilo Yir Savaya, he Eitzari, it's going on a person. But the Eitzah, which that person has, is the Eibishter's Eitzah, which he inherited, right? I told you this many times that the Frierdiker Rebbe's titles in his letters are much more generous than the Rebbe's. There's a title which he almost never uses. Yiras Hashem Eitzar, he uses by Yitzhak the Masmid and by the Rebbe. And occasionally by other people, very occasionally. But the by Yitzhak the Masmid, always Yiras Hashem Eitzar. It doesn't mean that they're from. That they have the Eitzah, they have the power of the Kerech HaNelm of Alakus, which is called Eitzah, which is Eitzah Shirish Maim. And I need you to know that I looked through the Basi Lagani. Never once did the Frierdiker ever make that connection. The Frierdiker talks about having an Eitzah L'mayla, and he does connect it to Seif L'mayla Adin Kates. But this allusion to the Gemara, this is a reference to the idea of Yiras Hashem Eitzari is the Rebbe's. So there's a Gili Elikus, Eitzah L'mata Adin Tachlis, and there's the Helam of Elikus, Seif L'mayla Adin Kates. And that Helam is higher than the Gili for whatever reasons. But Kolus will be in a Tzimtzum, and for some reason it's higher than the Yin Gilui. And that's the source of Eitzah Shal Yiras Shamayim. And that Eitzah is given to you and me, that we have the Yiras Shamayim necessary to win and fight and win the war. So they threw it, Makabim is called Gam, as Eitzah Shal Mayla received the supernal treasure. We win the war. The Jewish people go out victorious. And of course, now, here the Rebbe doesn't even say Mamish, right? The Rebbe said Mamish. In the later years, the Rebbe changed it to take it from a Yad Mamish. Mamish. Blineda on the next occasion, which I think will be Friday, and I hope to do Basi Lagani Tavshin Chafhei. I'm going to do Tavshin Memhei. I want to do the 3 Memorim of that Hemshech, and then I'm going to go back to Yitzchak Kislev. Be'ezer Hashem Yisbarach.